The media directs your attention to the sky, training you to watch for missiles. This is a strategic misdirection. The primary vector for systemic collapse isn't kinetic, it is silence. The true battlefield is not the air, but the abyssal plain of the ocean floor and the vacuum of low Earth orbit. A regime facing total economic insolvency, as documented by Al Jazeera in Iran, cannot afford a symmetric war. When confronted by a conventionally superior force, such as NATO assets on high alert, BBC, their strategic calculus is forced to pivot. They will not engage in a high-cost kinetic exchange they are guaranteed to lose. Instead, they must weaponize the system's own architecture. CSS reports detail the extreme vulnerability of the 1.3 million kilometers of subsea data cables that function as the planet's central nervous system. A simultaneous severing of key nodes, combined with satellite blinding, does not launch a missile. It creates something far more dangerous: a blind Leviathan. The blind Leviathan is the entire Western military and financial apparatus, deaf and dumb. No SWIFT transactions, no GPS, no high-frequency trading, no military command and control. In this state of total information blackout, a system built on launch-on-warning protocols cannot differentiate a system failure from a decapitation strike. This transforms a regional dispute over oil supply risks, Reuters, into an automated global solvency crisis. The primary motive is not territorial ambition. It is regime solvency. According to analysis from CSIS, an unpopular war creates a severe domestic liability. When a state's economic architecture begins to fail, as documented by Al Jazeera in Iran, where economic failure is prompting deadly protests, the leadership faces an existential crisis. The kinetic cost of symmetric warfare against a superior conventional force, such as NATO assets on high alert, becomes mathematically unsustainable. The regime is functionally bankrupt, politically, economically, and militarily. This weakness forces a pivot. Strategic calculus shifts from engaging in a losing conventional conflict to inflicting systemic damage upon the global system itself. This is not a choice. It is a necessity driven by insolvency. The regime's survival protocol dictates that if it cannot win on the battlefield, it must increase the cost of conflict for its adversaries to an intolerable level. Its weakness becomes its primary strategic weapon. The target vector becomes the global economy's critical infrastructure. As Reuters reports, supply risks are already elevating oil prices. This is the blueprint. Hostile states understand that avoiding war is critical to preventing a global oil crisis, as noted by WION. Therefore, by threatening these precise choke points, a conventionally weak but cornered state can create disproportionate global leverage. The goal is to transform their regional solvency crisis into a global liquidity crisis, forcing adversaries back to the negotiating table on new terms. This asymmetric escalation creates the ultimate liability. By weaponizing global economic stability, the cornered regime makes its own survival a zero-sum game against the solvency of the international order. This sets a launch-on-warning posture not just for missiles but for economic attacks. The final step in this logical sequence is to make the threat of a nuclear asset deployment the ultimate guarantor against regime change, transforming a regional conflict into a global solvency event. The core of this strategic shift is not political ideology. It is brutal mathematical economics. Analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, have laid out the new kinetic cost-benefit analysis. A modern main battle tank represents a capital expenditure of approximately $5 million. In contrast, a first-person view attack drone can be assembled for $500. This is not an incremental change. This is a 10,000 to 1 inversion in the economics of lethality. The ability to liquidate a multi-million-dollar strategic asset with a weapon that costs less than a consumer television is a paradigm shift. This phenomenon is what intelligence circles refer to as the democratization of violence. It means the monopoly on effective standoff kinetic force, once held exclusively by state-level actors with vast defense budgets, has been broken. For a regime facing economic obliteration, this isn't a tactical option. It's a strategic lifeline. They can't afford a symmetric war, but they can afford to flood a theater with thousands of these low-cost, high-impact asymmetric assets, turning every commercial shipping lane and energy hub into a potential target. The regional instability reported in legacy media is not chaos, it is a cultivated environment. These territories are not failing by accident. They are being engineered into gray zones, proxy laboratories for a new vector of warfare. The objective is not territorial conquest. The objective is systemic disruption, and the staging ground is deliberately placed outside the view of conventional deterrence. The primary accelerant is economic insolvency. Al Jazeera confirms that as Iran's economy fails, the regime's strategic calculus shifts. Faced with existential threat, their protocol moves from symmetric defense to asymmetric attack. This is not desperation. It is a documented response model for states facing a systemic solvency crisis. This pivot is a direct function of overwhelming conventional force. As the BBC reports NATO troops are on high alert, the kinetic cost of direct conflict becomes infinite for the adversary. They are mathematically forced to bypass the battlefield and weaponize the global system's own vulnerabilities. The gray zone is the deployment vector for this strategy. These zones provide plausible deniability to stage attacks on critical infrastructure. The primary target is energy leverage. Reuters confirms oil prices are already elevated due to supply risks. A minor, deniable kinetic event launched from a proxy laboratory, a limpet mine, a drone swarm, is not designed to sink a fleet. It is designed to trigger a liquidity crisis by making insurance for oil transport untenable. This is the blueprint for systemic liability. WION analysis warns that avoiding direct war is critical to preventing a global oil crisis. The gray zone strategy exploits this. It creates a zero-sum choice: absorb an escalating series of systemic economic attacks, or respond with a kinetic strike that validates the adversary's narrative and triggers a global solvency event. The regional fire becomes the accelerant for a global meltdown. The doctrine is designated launch on warning. It is not a decision. It is a pre-authorized protocol. According to CSIS analysis, a nation's leadership has minutes, not hours, to respond to verified data showing an incoming strategic strike. The system is engineered to retaliate based on sensor data from early warning networks, not after the first kinetic impact has liquidated a city. This protocol contains a systemic vulnerability. A targeted cyber attack, the primary vector of modern asymmetric warfare, can induce what military strategists call the fog of digital war. A nation's sensory organs, its radar arrays and satellite uplinks, are suddenly blinded. The screens show no signal. The data stream is dead. In this state of induced paralysis, the commander is forced into a zero-sum calculation. The question is no longer, are we under attack? It is, can we afford to assume we are not? The goal of a decapitation strike is to neutralize the enemy's ability to retaliate. Therefore, the absence of data becomes its own signal, evidence that the decapitation is already in progress. For a regime already pushed to the brink by economic insolvency, source number 1, the fear of total asset liquidation removes all other options. Hesitation guarantees annihilation. The fear of radar blindness does not create a choice. It forces the execution of the only available solvency protocol. The commander launches, not out of aggression, but out of a mathematical certainty that to do nothing is to lose everything. The deployment of NATO-aligned forces to high alert status is misinterpreted as a deterrent. It is an accelerant. For a regime experiencing terminal economic failure and internal protest, the calculus of conventional warfare becomes a liability. The primary objective shifts from battlefield parity to systemic leverage. The goal is no longer to win a kinetic exchange, but to export a solvency crisis, making the cost of containment greater than the cost of conflict. Analysts at CSIS have modeled the attack vectors available to a cornered state. Direct kinetic strikes on oil infrastructure are attribution certain and invite overwhelming retaliation. This is a zero-sum outcome. The optimal strategy is an attribution impossible event, a calibration shot to test the fragility of the global logistics and financial system. Within the next 12 months, expect a catastrophic logistics failure at a Tier 1 Northern European port, most likely Rotterdam, a multi-day, full network blackout of the container management and crane operating systems. It will be publicly framed as a complex ransomware event or a cascading systems update failure. The financial impact will register in the hundreds of billions as supply chains freeze and insurance liabilities spike. This is not the war. It is the pricing of the war. It is a mathematical demonstration of the capacity to weaponize the global economy, executed with plausible deniability. The message is simple. We can trigger a global solvency event at will. This is the Launch on Warning Protocol for economic warfare.